Chris Benoit. On June 24, 2007, Chris Benoit failed to appear at the Vengeance Night of Champions pay-per-view, where he was scheduled to face CM Punk for the reactivated ECW Championship. WWE replaced him last minute with Johnny Nitro, citing personal reasons on air. At the time, no one knew why he had no-showed. It looked like a standard no-show, but what WWE uncovered the next day would change the industry forever. The following day, June 25th, authorities discovered the bodies of Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their 7-year-old son Daniel inside their Georgia home. It was determined that Benoit had murdered his family before taking his own life in a double murder-suicide. Toxicology reports later revealed that Benoit had elevated levels of testosterone in his system, believed to be a result of synthetic hormone injections. No recreational drugs were found, but the findings reignited public concern over steroid use in professional wrestling and prompted further scrutiny of WWE's drug policies. WWE, unaware of the full details at the time, aired a 3-hour tribute episode of Monday Night Raw that night, featuring match highlights and testimonials from fellow wrestlers. When the nature of the incident was confirmed on June 26th, WWE immediately began removing Benoit from all future broadcast archives and promotional material, initiating one of the most complete historical redactions in wrestling history. His profile was deleted from WWE.com and his name was no longer mentioned on air. No other performer in WWE history had been removed from the record with such totality. His presence was eliminated from pay-per-view replays, documentaries, and WWE Network specials. The tribute episode and WWE's initial response drew intense criticism from fans and media once the full details were revealed. Internally, the fallout disrupted ongoing storylines. The ECW title direction shifted, abandoning a planned long-term program between Benoit and CM Punk. More broadly, the incident triggered a re-evaluation of WWE's drug policies, mental health oversight, and concussion protocols. The company overhauled its wellness policy, introducing stricter drug testing and implemented new safeguards around brain trauma, partially in response to Benoit's brain showing signs of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. The tragedy marked a turning point in WWE history, bringing the ruthless aggression era to a sudden end and forcing a public shift towards more controlled, PG-era programming. Owen Hart. On May 23, 1999, Owen Hart was scheduled to compete at WWF's Over the Edge pay-per-view at Kemper Arena in Kansas City, Missouri. Performing under the gimmick of the Blue Blazer, a masked parody of superhero-style wrestlers, Owen was set to make a theatrical entrance from the rafters using a harness and pulley system. The stunt was designed to fail comically, dropping him just above the ring as part of the act. But before the bell even rang, the night took a turn so devastating that WWF would never fully recover, physically, legally, or emotionally. As the live crowd watched and the production crew prepared for his cue, a malfunction in the quick-release mechanism caused Owen to fall from the rafters, plummeting approximately 78 feet into the ring. He struck the top rope chest first and collapsed on impact. The camera had cut away seconds before the fall, and commentators scrambled to fill the silence while paramedics rushed into the ring. Viewers at home never saw the fall itself, but they witnessed the immediate confusion and emergency response that followed. Owen was rushed backstage where medical staff attempted to revive him. He was pronounced dead shortly after, before any hospital transport occurred. He was 34 years old. Despite the fatal accident, the pay-per-view continued. WWF aired the remaining matches as scheduled, a decision that sparked immediate backlash from fans, wrestlers, and media. Minutes later, Jim Ross was informed of Owen's death and was instructed to announce it live on commentary, with no preparation and no additional context. Internally, the tragedy devastated locker room morale. Wrestlers like Jeff Jarrett, Owen's tag partner, were forced to perform their matches visibly shaken. The Hart family later filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the company, citing negligence in the design and rigging of the stunt. The case was settled out of court in 2000 for approximately $18 million. WWF permanently discontinued Over the Edge as a pay-per-view title. Owen Hart's death remains one of the only fatal in-ring accidents during a live wrestling broadcast. Since then, WWE has avoided high-risk aerial stunts involving harnesses or descents from height, marking a clear boundary for safety practices moving forward. Eddie Guerrero. On November 13, 2005, Eddie Guerrero was found unresponsive in his hotel room at the Marriott City Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He had been scheduled to participate in a taping of WWE's SmackDown that evening and was involved in key storyline plans leading into Survivor Series. He was 38 years old. But no one expected that Eddie's final storyline would be written without him, forcing WWE to rewrite an entire era overnight. When Eddie failed to answer repeated wake-up calls, his nephew and fellow wrestler Chavo Guerrero forced entry into the room and found him lying on the bathroom floor, by the sink, unresponsive. Emergency personnel arrived within minutes but were unable to revive him. The cause of death was later ruled as acute heart failure due to underlying cardiovascular disease, exacerbated by a history of past substance abuse, despite Eddie having maintained sobriety since 2001. At the time of his death, Eddie was one of the top stars on SmackDown and was being positioned for a return to the world title picture. He was scheduled to defeat Batista that very week in a triple threat match to become WWE Champion, with plans for a long-term feud against Randy Orton. His passing forced an immediate restructuring of storylines, championship directions, and brand dynamics. WWE aired a special episode of Raw the next night, followed by another on SmackDown, both featuring matches in Eddie's honor and emotional testimonials from the roster. Wrestlers broke character to grieve publicly, and the phrase "Viva la Raza" became a rallying cry both in kayfabe and in real life. Long-term, Eddie's death had ripple effects across the company. Rey Mysterio's underdog push leading to a WrestleMania title win was built directly on Eddie's legacy. The emotional fallout also intensified scrutiny on wrestler health, leading WWE to increase cardiac testing as part of its revamped wellness policy. Eddie's absence left a creative and cultural void that reshaped WWE's Latino representation, tag team divisions, and babyface roster for years to come. Brodie Lee, Jon Huber. On December 26, 2020, All Elite Wrestling announced the death of Jon Huber, known to WWE fans as Luke Harper and to AEW fans as Brodie Lee. At the time of his passing, he was just 41 years old and had recently completed a dominant run as AEW TNT champion. His sudden death with no prior public explanation sparked immediate confusion and speculation across the wrestling world. But the truth of Brodie Lee's disappearance and AEW's silence revealed one of the most tightly guarded real-life storylines in modern wrestling. Jon Huber had been off television since late October 2020, following a TNT title loss to Cody Rhodes in a dog collar match. Behind the scenes, he had developed a severe lung condition unrelated to COVID-19. AEW provided no public updates, honoring the family's request to keep his condition private. Only a small inner circle of friends and executives were aware of the severity of his illness. Huber had been positioned as a cornerstone of AEW's long-term plans, with his TNT title reign showcasing his main event potential. His death left a major creative gap in the promotion's roster development and storytelling arc. When news broke, the reaction from the wrestling community was instant and overwhelming. AEW dedicated the entire December 30th episode of Dynamite to his memory, calling it the Brodie Lee Celebration of Life. The tribute featured matches involving members of the Dark Order, Brodie's faction, and included Huber's son, Brodie Jr., being presented with his father's ring gear and named TNT Champion for Life. At the time of his passing, Brodie Lee was central to the ongoing evolution of the Dark Order. The faction had been transitioning from a cult-like heel stable into a more comedic fan-favorite group. His absence created a leadership void that was never formally addressed on screen. Instead, the group shifted into a more chaotic, tribute-driven direction in the months that followed. Brodie's death marked AEW's first major loss of an active performer and set the tone for how the company would handle real-life tragedies going forward. It also earned AEW widespread praise for respecting the privacy and dignity of the Huber family, creating a public example of how to honor a wrestler without spectacle. Brian Pillman. On October 5, 1997, Brian Pillman was found dead in his hotel room at the Budgetel Inn in Bloomington, Minnesota. He had been booked to wrestle that night at WWF's Bad Blood in-your-house pay-per-view against Dude Love. When he failed to show up, WWE staff contacted local authorities. Behind the curtain, WWE was scrambling to handle a real death just hours before the show went live. Police entered Pillman's room that afternoon and discovered him deceased. He was 35 years old. An autopsy revealed a heart attack caused by undiagnosed arteriosclerotic heart disease, the same condition that had killed his father years earlier. Pillman had shown no symptoms prior to his death. At the time, Pillman was a central figure in WWF's chaotic midcard. Aligned with the Hart Foundation, he played one of the company's most volatile characters, an unpredictable presence whose storylines included gun angles and home invasions. His gimmick blurred the lines between fiction and reality in ways that hadn't been seen before in WWE. Because the event was live, Vince McMahon announced Pillman's death on air with limited detail. The rest of the show proceeded as planned, but Pillman's match was quietly pulled from the card. The next night on Raw, WWE aired a sit-down interview between McMahon and Pillman's widow, Melanie, conducted just one day after his death. The segment was widely condemned as tasteless, with many in the industry calling it a low point in WWE's handling of real-life tragedy. WWE has never re-aired it and rarely acknowledges it today. Unlike later high-profile deaths, Pillman's passing did not result in a tribute episode or major policy changes. There was no wellness policy in place at the time. Though wrestlers paid tributes in the weeks that followed, the incident was quickly overshadowed by the growing momentum of the Attitude Era. Jay Briscoe. On January 17, 2023, Jay Briscoe, real name Jamin Pugh, was killed in a head-on car crash near his home in Laurel, Delaware. He was 38 years old and still active as one half of the ROH World Tag Team Champions with his brother Mark. He had just made it back to the national spotlight, then the story ended overnight. The crash occurred in the afternoon when another vehicle crossed the center line and struck Briscoe's truck. His 2 daughters were in the car and were seriously injured. Jay died at the scene. At the time, Ring of Honor, now owned by AEW's Tony Khan, was undergoing a relaunch with the Briscoes at the center. Their trilogy against FTR, capped off by a double dog collar match at Final Battle 2022, had put them back on the national radar after years of being kept off TV due to past controversy. Because of Warner Bros. Discovery restrictions, AEW couldn't air a tribute episode. Instead, a memorial event was taped and released online. AEW did close Dynamite with a graphic and later featured Mark Briscoe in a one-time tribute match against Jay Lethal. Jay's death ended ROH's tag title plans and reshaped his brother's career. What had been a final championship run became a legacy frozen in time. The Briscoes weren't just Ring of Honor veterans, they were its foundation. Jay's loss left a gap that no one in the promotion has ever been able to fill. It also reignited debate over corporate censorship, redemption, and who gets to be honored in the public eye. Perro Aguayo Jr. On March 20th, 2015, Mexican wrestler Perro Aguayo Jr. died during a tag team match for the promotion Crash in Tijuana. He was 35 years old and wrestling in the main event alongside Rey Mysterio, Manic, and Extreme Tiger. It was a match like any other, until one mistimed move turned a routine bump into a fatal moment. Aguayo took a standard dropkick from Mysterio meant to set up the 619. As he fell into position on the middle rope, his neck whiplashed awkwardly and his body went limp. At first, no one in the ring realized anything was wrong. He appeared to be selling the move, positioned exactly where he was supposed to be. The match continued for nearly a minute before anyone realized Aguayo wasn't moving. Manic attempted to interact with him mid-spot, and when there was no response, medical staff were called. Footage shows confusion at ringside as the referee and wrestlers began to understand the severity of the situation. Aguayo was transported to a nearby hospital and pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The cause was ruled as cervical spine trauma, a fractured vertebra that disrupted blood flow and led to cardiac arrest. The fatal damage wasn't caused by a direct blow, but by the angle and velocity of his neck during the fall. His death sent shockwaves across the wrestling world. Aguayo was a second-generation star, the face of Perros del Mal, and a major figure in AAA's future plans. He had been rumored to return to national television as a featured performer. The incident also exposed serious flaws in ringside medical preparedness. The delay in response, lack of immediate stretchers, and confusion during the emergency drew heavy criticism across Mexico. Today, multiple promotions, including AAA, now require trained medics at ringside, a policy born from the night the industry failed one of its own. Umaga. On December 4th, 2009, Edward Fatu, known to WWE fans as Umaga, died of a heart attack at just 36 years old. Though no longer under contract, he had been released only months earlier and was already in discussions for a potential return. His sudden death ended not just a career, but a legacy that WWE was never able to fully close. He had just left the main stage, but WWE never got the chance to bring him back. Earlier that year, Umaga had violated WWE's wellness policy for a second time and declined to enter rehab, leading to his release in June 2009. While nothing was official, there were discussions about a possible return once his situation had stabilized. In the meantime, he wrestled on the independent circuit, including a high-profile match against Mr. Kennedy in Australia just weeks before his death. On the morning of December 4th, Fatu was found unconscious at home by his wife. He was rushed to the hospital after suffering a heart attack, but died later that day following a second cardiac arrest. An autopsy revealed an enlarged heart and acute toxicity from a combination of hydrocodone, carisoprodol, and diazepam. Umaga's death deeply affected the Anoa'i Ai wrestling dynasty. As a cousin to Roman Reigns and the Usos, he had been expected to play a future role in their ongoing stories. His explosive style and silent aggression became a model for WWE's modern monster archetypes, echoed later in characters like Braun Strowman and Solo Sikoa. WWE issued only a brief public statement and did not air a tribute segment. Because his release was tied to a wellness policy violation, the company distanced itself from his passing, a move that drew backlash from fans and former colleagues who felt his contributions had been minimized. In the end, WWE never gave Umaga a tribute, but the bloodline gave him something more lasting: recognition through legacy.